Welcome into the LSU Sports Insider podcast. Today is Monday, October the 21st. I'm Zach Ewing with two of our Advocate LSU beat writers, Wilson Alexander, our lead football writer, along with Reed Darcey, back from SEC basketball media days. So we don't have to start basketball discussion here. We'll wait for the bye week for that.
Yeah, maybe next week in the football bye week.
There's too much football going on here, man.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
we're still in the thick of it.
We do have a good show for you today. We're going to talk a little recap of LSU Arkansas. Tigers win big up in Fayetteville, which is not a sentence you could say too often throughout recent history. And also, not that they don't win up there, they don't win big up there. And just kind of a bigger picture look, Wilson, at where the Tigers now fit in the CFP conversation, the SEC title conversation, because they're squarely in both.
Would you have believed me if I had told you in August that LSU and Texas A&M would play for sole possession of first place in the SEC?
I would not have.
No, I would have thought I was crazy too.
Are we sure this is football we're talking about? Like that?
Baseball question? We're like months ahead of baseball season or something? Yeah, no, I mean, for a couple of reasons, because LSU is a team that, maybe could be in the mix for that, but it felt like a lot of things would have needed to go right. And then Texas A&M, first-year head coach Mike Elko, coming off a few down years there at the end of the Jimbo Fisher era in particular, where it felt like, that was, I don't think anybody saw this coming, where you've got now a game that is going to have major college football playoff implications, SEC championship implications, a really big one here on Saturday night in College Station.
And I'll do you one better, Wilson. What if I had said that after week one, after LSU lost to USC and A&M lost to Notre Dame? They both started 0-1, right? And then they rattled off, 6 straight wins?
Yeah, both of them 6-1 now. Yeah, that's a good point, because they neither of them looked great in there, but both teams, to their credit, have improved throughout the season.
I think they were both kind of in the sleeper category, right? Like everybody talked about Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss, maybe even Missouri to a certain extent. And then it was sort of after that, you had your Tennessee and your LSU and your Texas A&M. Oh, maybe they can get in the conversation. Well, here they are. So a week full of talk about that game coming, of course. And like I said, we'll look back to the Arkansas game and take a big picture view. The LSU Sports Insider is brought to you by Waste Pro. Tiger fans, if you're planning a tailgate or event, keep your guests comfortable with portable toilets from Waste Pro. Call 225-744-6400 and mention the LSU Sports Insider for a special offer. And with that, we'll take our first break, and we'll be back and launch into sort of that SEC title, CFP conversation right after this.
There's no better place to parlay than Caesars Sportsbook. Parlay Builder gives you all the game day action from all across the league. Multiple games, legs, and props, all in one spot. It's so quick and easy, you can keep your focus on the games and your nachos. Or if you're focusing on one game, remember, you can place your same-game parlays live during the action. Caesars Sportsbook, the only sportsbook app with Caesars rewards.
You know how far I've gone, now I'm home again. I'm feeling more alive these days than I've ever been.
At the Baton Rouge Clinic, our sole focus is to provide exceptional health care for your entire family so that you can get back to doing what you love most. We are caring for generations.
You gave me love.
Okay, so let's dive in briefly, guys, to this LSU A&M matchup, and we'll have the full breakdown on Thursday's podcast. But suffice it to say for now, the winner of this game is not only in the driver's seat in the SEC, as you mentioned, Wilson, but nothing's a mathematical lock. College football's crazy. Things happen. But you're at the point where you can start to at least write them in pencil for one of the two slots in Atlanta, because neither team's schedule, both have one more difficult game. LSU's got a home game against Alabama. A&M has a home game against Texas. The rest of the schedule is manageable for both, and so you're going, man, the winner of this game, 7-1, looks pretty good, and that looks pretty good for Atlanta.
It does, especially because when you look across the conference now, Georgia, Tennessee, Missouri, Texas, and even Vanderbilt all have one conference loss. And all those teams except for Vanderbilt, which is 5-2, are also 6-1, just like LSU and A&M are. And this is first year where you don't have divisions, so you just got to finish in that top two within the SEC. Wouldn't it be funny here if we went down a bunch of the tiebreaker scenarios that they had to come out with those this year, and the very last one is just flipping a coin. Wouldn't it be amazing if we got into something like that in year one without divisions? I don't think it's going to get to that point. Things are going to shake themselves out. These teams are going to start to play each other even more. Georgia hosts Tennessee, like you said. LSU gets Bama. A&M gets Texas. Just this week in Alabama and Missouri play. So those things are going to start to fall into place. But, at this point in the year, you got a bunch of teams right there in the mix. This thing's completely wide open. And the winner of this game on Saturday certainly has an edge going through the rest of the schedule, because you'll also have the tiebreaker over that team. And that's going to be important, like you said, with A&M really having like one more sort of top tier game against Texas at the end of the year, which is going to be absolutely bonkers, that rivalry being renewed. And LSU having Alabama, you really want the tiebreaker, I think, between these two, because it could come down to what happens in this game as to who's playing in Atlanta. I think obviously Georgia and Texas are still very much in the mix there as well, and those other teams I mentioned too. But as you said, it is true that the winner of this game has an edge to getting there. And getting into the CFP, although it's a little bit of a different conversation with the CFP, because the loser still has a chance of going 10-2 and getting into the college football playoff. Any 10-2 SEC team is going to have an argument, and so. But at least in terms of actually making the SEC championship game, the winner here is in a really good position.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just think about where LSU was not even 4 weeks ago. LSU was on the razor's edge of being out of the playoff conversation completely, right? South Carolina game was very close. It could have gone either way. What if LSU picks up their second loss? Then how does that change the season, right? But it just goes to show how much LSU has improved since then. It's just, if you think back to USC, I mean, like we mentioned, Zach, on Saturday in the postgame show, the loss to USC looks worse and worse and worse as the season goes on. But LSU has really improved itself from then on, right? If you look back at that team, I see two completely different teams, pretty much. And the one that we saw against Arkansas on Saturday is the one that can put itself into these conversations, right? And that has done enough to put itself in those conversations. So really impressive to see how the team has grown and developed throughout the season. And if they can take care of business, down the stretch and pick up one of these games against A&M and Alabama, then they might be in. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just looking at it, I think that's what they have to do. That's how it's shaken up so far.
So the chance certainly seems legitimate. And we'll be totally honest, like you said, Wilson, we'll look at these SEC tiebreakers, like maybe after the Alabama game or something. There's too many. I read one scenario this morning where 8 SEC teams could all finish 10-2. It would require, let's see, Alabama and Ole Miss would have to win out, which means Ole Miss hands Georgia its second loss. Alabama hands the second loss to both Tennessee. No,
it would be LSU and
LSU and Missouri.
Yeah.
So those teams will have 2 losses. LSU beats A&M, but then loses to Alabama. A&M loses to LSU, but then beats Texas and hands them their second loss on Thanksgiving. So you could have 8 teams at 10-2.
I'm impressed you could remember all that.
It's not that crazy. Now in that scenario, by the way, LSU and A&M would have a rematch in the SEC title game, right, because one of their 2 losses was a non-conference loss, so they would be the only 2 7-1 teams. So that actually wouldn't be a tiebreaker situation. But the possibilities are endless. By the way, in soccer, one of the tiebreakers in like the World Cup, when you get down past goals, and if you have the same goals scored and goals against and all that, it comes down to like yellow cards. It's like a sportsmanship tiebreaker. Can you imagine how many unsportsmanlike conduct penalties did you have through the year?
Well, we know Texas wouldn't get in for throwing all the water bottles on the field. That would that wouldn't be good for them. So,
and Ole Miss wouldn't get in for faking injuries, even though they aren't getting called on that sort of stuff. It's not a penalty in the game.
We need like a panel, a Supreme Court of college football to decide these things, these sportsmanship tiebreakers.
That's a different conversation.
Yeah, we could have a whole podcast on that. Okay, the CFP conversation is a little bit different, as you said, Reed, simply because that USC loss complicates things for LSU, right? Like if they go 10-2, and whether they make it to, if you make it to Atlanta and you win, obviously you're in with a bye. But if you make it to Atlanta and were to lose, you'd be 10-3. And if you just go 10-2 and don't make it to the SEC title game at all, now all of a sudden you're kind of thrown into a hat with other 10-2 SEC teams and maybe some 11-1 teams, like let's say an Iowa State or a BYU goes 11-1 and Notre Dame goes 11-1. Yep. And you start getting compared, and people are going to look at that USC only went 6-6. How can you count that as a good loss? I mean, that's a different conversation for LSU.
This is a brand new conversation that we're having this year, right? Usually, if you lose the SEC championship game, you're out of the playoff, right? That's what happened last year with Georgia, right? I just think like 10-3 second place SEC team versus another 10-2 team or another 11-1 team from a different conference, the committee is going to have to weigh weigh those resumes against each other, and we don't really know how they're going to evaluate that, and we don't really know how they're going to make that decision for the at-large spots in the playoff. I think, on paper, when you think about it, like the second place team in the SEC, the team probably should get in, right? The second place finished team. But if you add that third loss in there, it sort of complicates things. And it sort of raises the question of, okay, if you win the SEC championship game, you're automatically in and you have a top 4 seed. But if you lose, then you could be, outside the playoff picture. It sort of, adds to the conversation of, do you even want to be in the conference championship game to begin with, and what is the value of these conference championship games? Should we even have them anymore? So those conversations, I'd imagine, are going to heat up later in the year once we get around that time of the calendar, and it's going to be fascinating to see how it shakes out and how the committee settles things.
A couple of points there. I definitely think the conference championship game should still matter.
I do
moving
too.
forward. I mean,
do
that it should mean something to win your conference, and you still have a reward for doing so. You get a bye. But like you said, I think that's the big reason the SEC is sort of waiting to, if it will ever do it, go to 9 games. It wants to see how this first year goes. How many teams do they get in? There was obviously conversation over the offseason about automatic qualifiers, and the SEC and the Big Ten trying to have a set number of teams that would get in from their conference, and having at least like 3 or 4 each, which is, I think, silly. But again, I think a conversation for another day. For LSU, I think a few things need to happen. Everything's within your control. Like you said, you got to at least split these next 2 games against A&M and Alabama, and then you have to win out after that, of course. But those games don't feel as intimidating as challenges within the SEC challenges. And LSU is still not a dominant team that's just going to go out every single week and blow everybody out. They got to be really playing up to their highest level and be locked in week after week. But they also these next 2 are the ones that give you the most pause. And so, start by splitting these 2 games, and then you also got to see how things shake out around the rest of the SEC, around the rest of the country. You probably need some help here and there just to feel even more comfortable if you end up being 10-2. You probably need like a BYU to lose, or a Kansas State to keep losing, or an Indiana to lose. Some of these other bubble teams, Notre Dame. Notre Dame's a really interesting team right now, where they're still, I still see them all the time in college football playoff projections, even though they lost to Northern Illinois.
It was like not even a good MAC team. It was middle of the pack in the MAC.
But it seems to, I think, suggest that the quality of the wins is going to really matter. Like LSU's loss to USC looks bad right now with the way that the Trojans have gone the rest of the year. But it's also, they got it out of the way early in the season. And so it's going to kind of, same sort of thing with Notre Dame's loss to Northern Illinois. It gives time to let that loss kind of fade into people's memories a little bit more. But on the sort of flip side of that, I think the committee is going to really value, okay, some of these teams, a lot of these teams are imperfect. Nobody's really truly great this year. But what's not so much the quality of the loss, but the quality of the wins on the other side of it. It's like, you look at LSU's schedule, like, they kind of need Ole Miss to keep winning and be like a 9-3 team at the very least. They need to go and beat out Texas A&M or Alabama at least. By the end of the year, the Texas A&M game might look better, if you have a win there over like a win over Alabama. And so I think it's just that's gonna be a big piece of it as we get later in the season. If LSU is able to keep winning and end up at least 10-2, it's the quality of the wins is going to probably make a big difference when you get to Selection Sunday.
Yeah,
if LSU is still in the conversation at that point, there's a lot that has to happen.
The quality of the wins, and then the other thing you mentioned there is the timing of the losses, which has always mattered in college football. My number one question with the committee this year is, how much do they weigh those conference championship losses? Because the winners get in automatically. So if you have a team that loses and that makes their resume maybe on paper slightly worse than a couple of other teams, do you punish them for playing in that game when they had a better resume going into that game? That's my number one question, because if that's the case, then the SEC and the Big Ten, and maybe the other conferences too, are going to have to take a hard look at whether they even want to play those games.
A lot of it matters, I think, on the context of that loss. Did you get blown out? Was it a close game?
Yeah.
What team won the conference? What kind of team were you playing? A lot of it matters. It's probably on a per-case basis, but I tend to think that the conference championship games should matter, and we should still keep them. We still need to use them as a deciding factor for the playoff, right? So a loss in a conference championship game, if these games mean a lot, and if we weigh them a lot, then a loss could drop you out. I mean, that's the harsh reality of it. I mean, this is college football. This is tough. The margins are thin. You can lose any given week. You can win any given week. So I tend to think that these games are still really important and that we should still value them and put added importance to them, because I don't want to see them go away. Too much has changed with this sport. I don't want to see those games go away. That's just my opinion.
Well, and if you're an LSU player or a player at any other SEC school, winning an SEC title freaking means something. At least it should. I mean, I think it does to all of these players and coaches beyond the CFP conversation. If you're an SEC champion and then you go out in the quarterfinals, you still get to wear that SEC championship ring for the rest of your life, right? Like, I mean, it still means something. So I know everybody wants to look at paper, and I love doing it too, and fill out your bracket and all that. Sometimes the emotion, like you look at conference tournaments in basketball, these conference tournament championship games, those kids are playing hard, even if they're both safely in the tournament.
Yep. Yeah. If you ask Kim Mulkey, she doesn't like the conference tournaments. She doesn't really see the value of it. I think she views it as, just another opportunity for players to get hurt or something, because most teams by then have already secured a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament by then. We're gonna see what it looks like this year for football. Is that how coaches are going to look at it? Is that how they're going to view it? I think, like you mentioned, Zach, a lot of it depends on how the committee ends up weighing these games.
Yeah, and that's the Florida State corollary. What if Carson Beck gets hurt in the SEC championship game? Does that change the way the committee views Georgia?
Right.
I mean, like, seriously, I don't know the answer to those questions. So. Hey, today's show is brought to you in part by the Baton Rouge Clinic, your trusted healthcare provider in the heart of Baton Rouge. Whether you're in need of primary care, specialist services, or urgent care, the Baton Rouge Clinic has you covered with a team of dedicated and experienced professionals. Visit BatonRougeClinic.com to learn more or to schedule your appointment today. The Baton Rouge Clinic, caring for generations. And with that said, guys, let's take a quick look back at the Arkansas game and wrap those things up. We got a few things to talk about. We did our keys to the game on Thursday, and I feel like for the first time all year we kind of nailed these things. LSU really hit all of them, and today's Keys to the Game segment is proudly sponsored by Associated Grocers. Join our team and support the success of local independent retail grocers. Apply today for available positions at Associated Grocers. Reed, we talked about running the ball, stopping the run.
Yep.
LSU ran the ball, they stopped the run, really for the first time all season, and football kind of becomes an easier game when you can do that.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be similar keys this week. But just looking back on Arkansas, I think LSU was efficient on the ground, really from the start of the game to the end of it, I think for the first time this season. And they also did a great job defending the run from the start of the game pretty much to the finish. So Brian Kelly said, I believe he said it today or maybe after the game, I'm getting the quotes mixed up, but he said that this is maybe the first time they've played all 4 quarters. We kind of said South Alabama looked like that. But LSU, didn't play a great second half, I guess. They only scored 1 touchdown in that
coasted.
game. Yeah, and Brian Kelly didn't think that way. He thinks Arkansas, this was the most complete performance they've had so far. Running the ball is going to be a huge part of this offense. We thought it would be a lot better than it was through the first 6 weeks of the season. And Brian Kelly talked a little bit today. He kind of made it seem like the issues with the run game have sort of been like a game of whack-a-mole. Like you fix one issue, like the timing on the offensive line, but there's another issue with the backs not seeing the hole. Okay, so you fix the backs not seeing the hole, but then there's another issue over here with the receivers not cracking in and getting their blocks. So he thought that this was the first time where everything sort of came together and they were all in sync in the run game. And he said it's a product of them working extra hard on it in practice. And so he said they're going to continue to do that, and maybe the results will follow. They'll keep on stacking these kinds of efficient performances on the ground going forward.
And you talked about running the way that LSU controlled this game on the line of scrimmage, and is how that was a product of, or how that resulted in LSU being able to stop the run and run the ball effectively. LSU outgained Arkansas 158-38 on the ground, which is pretty good. That's a good recipe for success. And that was the sort of the thing. And then even in the fourth quarter, when LSU kind of wanted to be able to put the game on ice, 8-minute drive, 14 plays, 11 of them were runs, and Arkansas just couldn't stop it at that point. Durham ends up getting to the end zone for the 3rd time in this game at the end of that drive. And that was the thing that Brian Kelly said post-game. Those are the signs of a team that's emerging as a contender, when you can do that. And for LSU, that's also showing a different way to be able to win games. We talked about at the very beginning of this podcast, what if I had told you that LSU and Texas A&M would be playing for first place in the SEC? By the same token, what if I had told you in August that LSU would win a game by 24 points in which Garrett Nussmeier did not throw a touchdown and threw for less than 250 yards.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have believed it myself. For a long time this season, that was the recipe that LSU had to follow to win games, was putting the ball in Garrett Nussmeier's hands, and he was really effective at that. But Arkansas was sort of playing this quarters coverage, deep shell, and LSU said, okay, well, then we're just going to hit these sort of 8 to 10 yard comebacks on the outside over and over and over again. And that was a big part of the offense. It was really effective, kept the chains moving at times. Penalties ended up hurting them and sort of making them settle for field goals. But by and large, they were able to keep their offense on track because of the run game. And it was really efficient, like you said, in this game. Caden Durham was excellent. And now you're starting to see an LSU team that isn't just sort of a one-trick pony. It's becoming more complete. It's playing complementary football. And that's a really good sign for where this team is headed.
I'm not sure I would have believed that about Nussmeier 2 weeks ago, that they'd win a game that easily without him having a big day. But LSU played a very patient game. They took their field goals when they were there in the first half, and of course you want to be more efficient in the red zone, and they're going to have to be these next 2 weeks. Of course you don't want to have the penalties, but they just, you talk about an offense taking what's there. I think as a team they kind of did that. There was not a lot of panic. There was just sort of a systemically building this lead and doing what was necessary to extend it throughout the game.
And this can be a good segue into the defense, Zach, because last year's team, I think if they had kicked 3 or 4 field goals in the first half, last year's team probably would have given up 20 plus points in the first half, and then LSU would have had to play catch up in the entire second half. This defense did a great job on Saturday against Arkansas. And it was probably the best performance I've seen from them in 2 years.
Yeah, and now they're stacking games on top of each other because they played really well against Ole Miss, and now they're playing really well against Arkansas. Held Arkansas to less than 300 yards, obviously only 10 points. Now 2 weeks in a row that LSU has not allowed a touchdown in the second half. And they did the same thing against UCLA. They didn't give up a touchdown in the second half against them. You're seeing steady improvement on the defensive side of the ball. They've got an identity, which is create pressure up front and then be able, everything sort of stems off of that. It took a while for them to finally get to Taylon Green, but in the first half they were still flushing him out of the pocket, and then in the second half they end up with 3 sacks. And then Whit Weeks made that incredible interception. He had one of those sacks too. We'll talk about him more in a minute. But it was just showing that this defense, I got a question for the mailbag last week, is this real? Is the defense getting better after the game against Ole Miss? The game against Ole Miss proved that this defense has made strides, and now they're actually becoming like a reason that LSU is winning games. We've really seen it for about a month now, where this defense still has warts. The pass defense is susceptible at times. They are not a perfect unit, but they're also up to 35th in the country in terms of points allowed per game. And they are one of the top teams in the country in terms of sacks. They're averaging like 3.4 sacks per game. They're also on the back end of the defense. They're still susceptible in terms of giving up lots of yardage in the game, but they're making pass breakups. LSU ranks 14th nationally in passes defended. They have 35 pass breakups this year.
Wow.
Not a lot of interceptions, but they're getting their hands on the ball and knocking things away. And it's really creating a defense that is giving them, more and more chances to win games, and sort of taking some of the pressure off the offense. The offense doesn't have to be perfect anymore like they were last year, and what it felt like they had to be at times early this season, because the defense isn't sort of on its heels and reacting. It's pressing the issue against teams.
You got the sack numbers on you?
I can pull it up real quick.
Top 10 in sacks. They've got 24 so far.
Yep.
That's tied with Ole Miss for 7th, I believe.
And Duke, yeah.
Tied for 7th. Last year, after 7 games, they had 13 sacks. So
Wow.
they've almost doubled their total through 7 weeks last year.
On LSU's current pace, we'll kind of have to see how this continues to shake out, so don't get too far ahead of ourselves. But on LSU's current pace, it might have one of the top 2 sack seasons in school history. They're because they're averaging like 3.4 a game, they're going to be up there.
Those are great stats. I said this on Thursday, and Reed, you and Rab kind of raised your eyebrows at me. I actually said I thought this might be a tougher game than Ole Miss, just given the scenario of coming off of a big win, going on the road, that I might be more impressed. I do think unequivocally LSU played better this Saturday than they did against Ole Miss. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree. So it was the quality of the opponent maybe is a little bit different, but having to go on the road, like you said, in a tough spot, a potential sort of trap kind of field game against a team that was coming off a bye, after having upset Tennessee, sort of seemed like on the rise. They were never like scrambling, like it seemed like it took a heroic comeback at the very end to beat Ole Miss, and they were in control of this game from start to finish.
Ole Miss, there was some fortune and then they made some big plays at the end that they had to make. They took advantage of the good fortune, but they didn't need any good luck on Saturday.
There was no 50-yard touchdown run that you give up in the first half. There was no sort of late kind of. There wasn't like the early drop that Trey Harris had, where the receiver just beats you down the middle of the field and he drops a touchdown.
Yeah.
There was nothing like that today. Like the only touchdown that LSU gave up, it was kind of a little bit of a breakdown, but that was really only it. That was really the only blip that they had. I mean, otherwise they were totally stout and locked in, and then they were really fundamentally sound, and then they played really well. I don't know.
Yeah, you don't need to be perfect to win college football games. You just got to be pretty good, and they were pretty good on Saturday. So, Tiger fans, Associated Grocers is hiring. Join a team committed to the success of independent retail grocers. Apply today at Associated Grocers and be part of something great. That's going to move us into our star player segments. That's brought to you by Waste Pro. Ensure your tailgate or event is a hit with clean and convenient portable toilets from Waste Pro. Rent yours today. And we've mentioned both guys. We went with a double this week. Caden Durham, 101 yards, 3 touchdowns. And then Whit Weeks, for the second straight week, he follows up his 18 tackle performance against Ole Miss, or was it 19? Was it
18.
18 tackle performance against Ole Miss with another huge game, and this time he had the big splash play where he tips the pass up to himself and sets up LSU's third touchdown.
Whit Weeks, you mean the SEC's leading tackler, Whit Weeks?
That's the
that
one.
guy?
That's
the one who's already got 69 tackles this season. I mean,
That's incredible.
Yeah, and after not even like starting every single game, he's just been amazing, especially since Harold Perkins went down and he became a full-time starter and really playing every single snap. He gets downhill so fast and he just goes. And we saw it as a freshman last year, but now it's more like in control. He has a full sense of what he's supposed to be doing and his role in the defense. Because of a byproduct of experience. He talked a lot last year about how he would sort of have to like look over at Greg Penn or at his brother who was on the field with him at times and like, what am I doing? What do I got? And they would sort of tell him and he would go. Well, now his experience is catching up, and that's allowing him to just play so fast. He's so disruptive. This is a linebacker-driven defense, and he and Greg Penn are playing really good football the last few weeks. And then Weeks in particular is the one who's sort of been the catalyst. He brings a ton of energy to them defensively. Players talk about that all the time. He's the guy who sort of makes this thing run right now. He was phenomenal on Saturday. Not just with the interception that really was the backbreaker in this game, but also with a sack, a drive later. It's 3rd and 10. He sort of sits back there as a spy. Taylor Green breaks the pocket, and he just goes and gets him. And, Brian Kelly said after Harold Perkins went down, I asked him, are you going to have to sort of are you going to feel like your defense might be less versatile because Harold could do so many different things, even though it wasn't really working at the time? And he said no, because of Whit Weeks. That Weeks might not have sort of the same pass rush ability as Harold Perkins, but he's just as athletic in space. And as Kelly said after the game on Saturday, he's an elite linebacker in this conference, and he's certainly proven to be that to this point.
Yeah, and if you look at theadvocate.com, our photographer, Michael Johnson, shout out to him. He was on a great angle. He got a great series of shots of the Whit Weeks interception from the deflection all the way to the celebration. So I thought that was really cool. He's been really good, and I believe it's the first time we have a co-LSU Sports Insider Player of the Week, right?
I think it is. Yeah. Take the Caden Durham half of this.
Yeah, Caden Durham was great. Brian Kelly said today that he's still not 100% from that foot/toe injury he suffered, I believe, against South Alabama. So it's really impressive to see what he's been doing, especially the last 2 weeks. I mean, he's LSU's top running back. He's the best running back. He's been the best, most explosive, most efficient runner so far. I was really impressed by his first touchdown, which was a 22-yard run, 2nd and goal, and he just sort of bounces outside, breaks a couple tackles, and then gets it in by himself. That was an example where penalties kind of derailed the drive, but Caden Durham saved it. He creates his own yards, right? He breaks tackles. He can use his speed to get out in space, and it's just really impressive what he's been doing when he's not fully healthy, right? When he still has these lingering kind of foot-toe issues. So I'd expect him to only get healthier going forward, and he'll just keep continuing to be part of LSU's offense. I believe he had 21 carries This
season
week.
high
That's probably
21
a
carries.
season high. Yeah. So I'd expect, if LSU can control games like this again, you'll probably see that number hover, 15 to 20 carries.
And as he, like you said, he just continues to feel better on the foot. He was wearing a precautionary walking boot after the game against Arkansas, and he said he's fine. Like it's just sort of had. It's just been kind of necessary since the foot injury against South Alabama that they were really careful with it. And so, this guy coming out after the locker room with a boot on his foot after rushing for 101 yards. And according to Pro Football Focus, 80 of those were after contact, and 201 of his 382 rushing yards this season have come after contact. That was something that Brian Kelly pointed out after his sort of breakout game against South Carolina, was that he was breaking tackles and that you have to do that in this conference, and you do. And he's been able to the run blocking, and I think maybe we'll get into this more in a little bit, was much better. LSU kept sort of running these stretch zone plays, getting Arkansas moving sideline to sideline instead of being able to just kind of vertically get upfield. And so it felt like LSU's running backs had bigger holes at the line of scrimmage than they've had for most of this season, just sort of watching on tape. But they did also then all those running backs, but Durham in particular, did a good job of seeing those holes, putting their foot in the ground, and getting upfield. And for him to do that at less than 100%, as Brian Kelly said on Monday in his press conference, is extremely impressive, especially as a freshman. I mean, he's just showing a ton of grit and toughness and just overall ability, because he's fast and he's elusive.
Yeah, and I think you talk about Pro Football Focus. I think like 4 of LSU's top 6 grades from Arkansas were offensive linemen. 4 of their top 6 offensive grades were linemen, so that's a good sign too. And what did Kelly put the number 85%? He estimated is where Caden Durham is. So that'll lead us into our injury report, which is brought to you by the Baton Rouge Clinic. Caden Durham, 85%. CJ Daniels came back and had a breakout game. He led LSU in receptions and receiving yards, 8 receptions, 76 yards. And then he left late after taking a big hit. No talk about him. It maybe seems like it was just a wind knocked out of him situation. LSU had the game in hand. He's been banged up. Just leave him out. The other receiver would be Chris Hilton Wilson. Still no surefire sign on him.
Yeah, no. I mean, I sort of said this back in September. It was like, just sort of wait and see, and whenever Chris comes back, be happy about it. And that's still where we're at with him. We'll see if he's able to get back on the field here soon. Brian Kelly said last week that they were sort of hopeful, but it was still felt like an outside chance. He still hasn't, according to Brian Kelly, what we've heard from him, fully returned to practice even, still sort of doing things on the side. So, we'll see. At this point, it's really about, CJ Daniels. It didn't, post game, seeing him down the field, it didn't seem like anything was amiss. There was I don't think any problems. He was part of the celebration and all that down on the field afterwards. And so I would be surprised if he shows up on the injury report Wednesday, but we'll just have to kind of see if he does.
And the only other, really, 2 other injuries are Sage Ryan and Greg Penn. They both kind of got banged up a little bit against Arkansas, but they both came back to the game. They both played. So maybe they might pop up on the availability report on Wednesday, but nothing really significant to add other than, Chris Hilton, who've been following all season. So.
Yeah, at this point, it seems like LSU's actually found a place where, they've lost a bunch of guys to season-ending injuries, but, knock on wood, it seems like they're fairly healthy based with who they have available at the moment going into the Texas A&M game. 2 quick updates on the Texas A&M side of things real quick. Their offensive lineman, Chase Basantis, his status is uncertain going into this game. Mike Elko didn't have an update today, but their all-around athlete, Terry Bussey, a guy who LSU was trying to get in this last recruiting class, has done a lot of things for them. He missed their game against Mississippi State, and he's expected to play against LSU.
Okay, so pretty good news. And again, LSU does have another bye week coming up after A&M. So those guys who are kind of banged up, you get through this week, you get that week off before Alabama too. So hey, if you're enjoying the show, hit the like button for us. And if you're really enjoying the show, tell your friends about it and share the link, all that kind of good stuff. Leave a comment. We appreciate all of that. You can also subscribe at theadvocate.com/subscribe and read all of these guys' work, see the Michael Johnson photos and Hillary's photos and all the stuff that you guys that you guys referenced. And with that, I think we're going to take our second break. We're going to be back. Got some sports betting update odds for LSU to make the CFP and to win the SEC. So those will be interesting. And we'll also go around the SEC right after this break.
Since 1988, Classic Industrial Services, Inc. has led the industry in specialty contracting. From thermal insulation to scaffolding, coatings, and beyond, we cover it all. Every minute matters in our commitment to quality and safety. We're here to serve with roofing, siding, heat trace, and refractory services. Visit classicindustrial.com for more information.
Experience the convenience and cleanliness that Waste Pro brings to Mardi Gras, LSU tailgates, and festivals with our top-notch portable toilet services. Perfect for large crowds and community events. Join the countless satisfied families and organizers who trust Waste Pro to keep their gatherings spotless and sanitary. Discover more about our services and make your next event a success at wasteprousa.com.
Welcome back to the LSU Sports Insider. Time for our sports betting segment with the Queen of Baton Rouge, proud sponsor. Experience the thrill of game day at 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails, your premier destination for elevated sports entertainment. Got a couple numbers on the bottom of the screen, guys. LSU plus 450 to win the SEC. They're the third choice behind, I think it's Georgia and Texas A&M. I'll check on that. So obviously a clear path. We talked about that one, where if they beat Texas A&M, they're in really good shape to make the game. Now, the college football playoff, a little bit different story. LSU's minus 110 basically means they're 50-50 to make the playoff at this point. But they have only like the 20th best odds in the country to win the national championship at 35-1. Even though they're number 8 in the country, they're like behind teams like Ole Miss. I guess there's still a little bit of a lack of respect that LSU could get into the playoff and win it.
Yeah, that feels. I think that feels right based on kind of some of what we've seen. I'm surprised that they're behind Ole Miss because they have a better chance of getting in probably than Ole Miss does. Ole Miss still has to host Georgia, and if they're a 9-3 team, like they're not going to get in. So, but maybe it's because they have some chances like that to sort of catapult themselves back in. I don't know as much about betting as you do, but I feel like just in terms of where LSU is as a team right now, I do think they're kind of undervalued a little bit. Seems like they're not getting talked about that seriously as a potential college football playoff team. Maybe it's folks don't believe in what they've done the last few weeks. Maybe it's still having USC in their heads from watching the first game. But LSU's got a chance now these next 2 weeks to sort of put all that aside, and really prove, are they for real, or are they sort of one of these October pretenders or not? The last few years, they've gone into November sort of in somewhat similar situations. At this point, of course, they already had 2 losses, but big games, mostly being those Alabama games, with a chance to try to put themselves in contention for a spot. And that was obviously a different calculation because it's a 4-team playoff. But they, last year in particular, Brian Kelly brought this up on Monday, they went into that game with a chance of contending for a spot at 10-2. If they could beat Alabama, and then they lost that game. So I think they understand what's in front of them and what they had to have to do in order to be able to actually sort of, exceed those odds.
Each of the first 2 seasons, it never really felt like LSU was close to winning the SEC, right? They
played for an SEC title.
They made it to the SEC title game, the first
They're massive
year,
underdogs, yeah.
But I don't think anyone expected them to win that game to be competitive with Georgia. So this feels like it's the closest they've been under Brian Kelly. Again, that could change if they lose to A&M this week. But when you look at the odds going forward and what it means. I think the USC loss is what's really weighing them down in terms of just the odds makers and the way people perceive LSU. Because imagine if they had beaten USC, right? They'd be undefeated, top of the SEC. Imagine where they'd be ranked in the AP poll.
Second, maybe.
So
undefeated.
Something like that. So just the loss to USC. We said before the season that it was probably the most important game on LSU's schedule. They lost it. We'll see if it comes back to bite them later in the year.
I don't know that it was the most important game on their schedule, but either way, for LSU, just one point to make. It's like there's a lot on this Texas A&M game, but because we're in the 12-team playoff era now, you can lose and still you can still make the playoff at 10-2. Like we talked about that a lot earlier, but I just want to kind of end on that note where it's like it's a little bit different this year. It's not the end all be all.
Right.
Like you still have, because you beat Ole Miss and Arkansas, a little bit of room for error. You can lose one of these next 2 games, still end up picking up a quality win if you split them, and have an argument come Selection Sunday if you then win out after that. And so it is not the sky is not falling if LSU loses this game. But if they win this game, then the momentum really starts to pick up for them as a serious player on the national scene.
Yeah, I agree. Just to correct myself on a couple of points, they're actually looks like tied for the 13th choice to win the national title. They are even with Texas A&M at 35-1, just behind Ole Miss at 30-1, and then they are the third choice for the SEC behind Georgia and Texas, and just ahead of Texas A&M for that spot. So the Queen of Baton Rouge. You can catch all the action at the Queen Casino's DraftKings Sportsbook Bar in 1717 Kitchen and Cocktails with top-notch screens and live betting. It's the ultimate spot to watch your favorite teams and enjoy a cold brew or signature cocktail. The Queen Casino is the only land-based casino in Baton Rouge and your go-to for game day or any day. Visit today and elevate your sports watching experience. All right, and before we wrap things up, we're going to go around the SEC, which is brought to you by Classic Industrial Services. At Classic Industrial Services, every moment matters. Guys, obviously Texas, Georgia was the huge game. Reed and I were kind of reacting live to it during the LSU postgame show on Saturday night. That one has turned the conference on its head again, as well as Tennessee beating Alabama.
It's pretty awesome that we're sitting here on, what is today, October
21st?
21st,
Yeah.
Thank you. And the SEC doesn't have an undefeated team.
Nope.
As a result of Georgia beating Texas. It's the most wide open that I can ever remember the conference being, and certainly in my fairly limited recollection. But I think I pulled up this stat back when Georgia, I don't know, it was a few weeks ago, where the SEC hadn't had a regular season with my words getting completely jarbled there. There had always been an undefeated team at the end of the regular season every year since 2017. And even then, the only reason there wasn't was because Alabama lost the Iron Bowl. Like, it took until the very last week of the regular season.
No, that was 2013. It was Kick 6.
Right.
But yeah.
That took until the very last week of the regular season. And so this is really as wide open as it's been in a long time. And, Georgia still seems like now it has maybe reasserted itself as the top sort of team in the conference going on the road to beat Texas like that. But it's still anybody's game. And Texas could still very well sort of take that punch, which was because Georgia was really the first truly difficult game that they had played, like top tier team that they had played. Maybe they adjust to that and continue, and then still go on and do win championships this year. It's still possible. And so they got to get a lot better. But that's I think it's just. I don't know. I've rambled here, but the conference is wide open, and Georgia looks like it's at the top of that heap now after that sort of impressive win. But it's still for anyone's taking.
Yeah, some people said expanding the playoff would devalue the regular season. The regular season would matter less. It sure hasn't felt like that to me. At least I know I never really bought into that argument. These games feel like there's a lot riding on them, every week, even though these teams have greater margins for error. It feels like the enthusiasm is really strong, about as strong as it's been in quite some time. The competitiveness of the games has also been a lot better. When you think about, Vandy beating Alabama, right? It just seems like all these teams, if you look just in the SEC, all these teams are closer than they have really in a long time, than they have been in a long time. So that means that the race is wide open, and it's going to be a really fun back half of the season to see how it shakes out.
And speaking of Alabama real quick, I mean, because especially, they're coming here to Tiger Stadium in a few weeks. They lose that Tennessee game. They've got 2 losses before the month of November for the first time since 2007. Nick Saban's first season there. This is a very different Alabama team. One that you, as an LSU fan, I think have to feel pretty good about playing here in a couple of weeks, because they just look completely discombobulated. They're not very disciplined. There was the weirdest thing within that Tennessee game where the 2 receivers took a step backward and looked like they were faking a jump shot. And the offensive coordinator was asked about it on Monday, and he said he didn't really go into detail, but he said that everything we do on the field is intentional. And I'm like, that was intentional? What about that was intentional?
Something else later, but in a huge game to set something, I don't know.
It was very odd. It's just this isn't the Alabama team that you're used to seeing. And that's been a big part of the conference dynamic, that you thought maybe they were still going to be up there at the top after they beat Georgia. But they just have had 3 games in a row where they have not looked very good at all. And Now they've already got 2 losses, and if they take another one, they got to play Missouri this weekend. Missouri hasn't lived up to expectations, but we'll see kind of how that game shakes out, or if they then come here to Baton Rouge and lose that one, then Alabama's out of it.
Yeah, LSU fans, I know, y'all would love nothing more than to land a knockout blow on Alabama. But the flip side of that coin is we talk about your quality wins in the CFP discussion. If Alabama were to lose that game and then also drop, let's say this weekend's game to Missouri or the Iron Bowl, I'm not sure the other conference game that they have left, but if all of a sudden they become like an 8-4 team, people that's not really a resume win anymore. I mean, it's maybe a lower level resume win, but not something you really hang your hat on. So it's kind of that double-edged sword. We'll see what happens with Alabama, and we'll talk more on Thursday. But that Missouri-Alabama game, Brady Cook kind of goes Willis Reed and comes back from the hospital, leads Missouri to beat Auburn, finds another way to lose a game, and so that's a big game too. That's like Missouri's only got 1 loss, but they have one of the weaker schedules, probably not getting in at 10-2, so that may be an elimination game for the SEC title game or the CFP too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it definitely sets up that way because Missouri, with the softness of its schedule, needed to win all of its big games, and if it takes another loss, it feels like it's out. Even if it were to run the table after that and finish at 10-2, like you said, if it's one of those 10-2 teams, but it doesn't really have any like strong win to hang its hat on, it would be hard to see them really having an argument of getting in.
Yeah, you would need total chaos at that point. So today's episode of LSU Insider is brought to you by Classic Industrial Services, proudly serving Louisiana and the entire United States with metal siding and roofing, steam and electric tracing systems, thermal insulation systems, refractory services, and much more. From large capital projects to commercial projects or small quick response needs, Classic Industrial is your go-to for quality and safety. They're not just about business, they're a proud community partner, supporting local initiatives and helping build a stronger Baton Rouge. Because at Classic Industrial Services, every minute matters. So we talk about this SEC that's wide. I don't think the top teams are as good as maybe they have been. I think the bottom teams are better than they have been, and so every week is this dogfight. But this week that really applies, guys, and we'll end there. Back where we started, LSU at Texas A&M on Saturday. I think Koki and Rab are going to be in here on Thursday. So we'll kind of your final thoughts about that game as from a podcast perspective.
Well, if you're asking me for a score prediction, I don't have one.
I purposely did not.
I hope you're not putting me on the spot.
Not putting you on the spot for that.
A&M, really good defense. It's going to give LSU problems. Really good run game. Their offense runs the ball well. The offensive line does a good job of opening up holes and protecting Connor Weigman. So the offense, I think it has a reputation for not being very good. I think it's better than some people give it credit for, given the run game. The running back is a guy named Le'Veon Moss. He went to Estruma, a local kid, Baton Rouge kid. So that's an angle for LSU fans to watch. But the main thing with them is their defense, right? Mike Elko's a defensive guy. There's a lot of talent back there. So LSU's offense is going to really have to be sharp to score enough points to beat A&M because that defense is legit.
This is, you kind of like we were talking about at the top of the show, this isn't what you thought coming into the season would be LSU's toughest game. All of a sudden, it looks like, I think, this is LSU's toughest game of the season. It's sort of set up that way, the way that everything is played out, because you're going on the road to Kyle Field 6:30 at night. That place, as weird as it is tough to play in.
Did you know EA Sports briefly ranked it the toughest place to play in the country?
Yes, and they're gonna, all those yellow leaders and everything are gonna be going, and it's gonna be hostile because we talked about how the Ole Miss game set up well for LSU because it was at home. And the Alabama game sets up well because it's at home. You got to go on the road here and play really and execute at a really high level because Texas A&M has been pretty good this season, and like you said, they've been able to run the ball really effectively. It's going to just be a battle on the line of scrimmage. When you got to talk about a guy like Nick Scorton, Purdue transfer, came into Texas A&M, has been really good. They're strong up front, and they've got some good pieces at linebacker too, and some of what Ryan Kelly was talking about today. But LSU's strength has been in its pass pro on the offensive line. And now that we've seen the run game get going too, if they can start to actually really have a balanced attack, and Garrett Nussmeier can continue to play well. We've seen sort of mixed things out of him in SEC play. When you look at it now over 3 games, his completion percentage has kind of been down. He had the multi-interception game against Ole Miss. He almost threw a couple picks against South Carolina. Ended up just being the one, but because another one got called back by a penalty. He needs to be really sharp in this game. This needs to be Garrett Nussmeier's probably best game that he's played yet as a starter because of going on the road at night and all those things that we talked about, and being able to kind of help balance out this offense. You know, he's made some fantastic plays. This isn't to say like he hasn't been good. This just needs to, I think, be the sharpest that we've seen Garrett Nussmeier. And if he does that, then I feel like LSU is going to have a really good chance to win this game because we're seeing a team that is continuing to get better every week. But I feel like it's going to be a game that neither team sort of dominates. It'll probably be some back and forths, and I don't have a score prediction either at the moment. I want to reserve that until we kind of get later in the week. But you know, LSU can win it if he in particular, I think, plays as best as he has.
Wilson, is there any truth to the rumor you're going to be at midnight yell practice on Friday?
Absolutely not. I think it would be cool to see one day.
I agree.
To be like,
it's so
what
weird.
is this?
It's so weird.
Just to actually see it in person would be one of those sort of college football things, like only in college football. But no, I will not be there. I'll probably be eating barbecue in Houston.
That's not a bad place to be either. So, all right, it's LSU's biggest game of the year to this point, and maybe their biggest game of the year all season long. And we will have a full breakdown on Thursday's LSU Insider podcast. Our thanks to you for joining us. Hit the like button on your way out. Subscribe to the LSU Sports on NOLA.com YouTube channel, and subscribe to The Advocate at theadvocate.com/subscribe. You can get in for $1 a month for the next 6 months, get you all the way through football season. For our producer, Alex Lee, for Reed Darcey and Wilson Alexander, I'm Zach Ewing, and thanks for watching the LSU Sports Insider.